When you first try a new exercise, you might be concerned of if you're doing it right. One way people tend to validate or invalidate whether or not they're doing a move right or not is if they feel it in the correct spot. In other words, if you're doing a bicep curl and you feel it in your bicep, then you must be doing it correctly. But if you feel it anywhere else, then you must be doing it incorrectly. I tend to discourage this even though I want you to be aware of how you feel during a particular movement, and feeling in the wrong area may actually be a sign that you're doing it wrong. But just because you're feeling it in an area you may not expect doesn't always mean that you're doing the exercise wrong.
Unless you're feeling pain, then you're probably doing the exercise wrong. The first reason feeling may not be a good indicator of proper movement is there is more than one feeling you get from doing an exercise, not just burning or straining. Pain is obviously one feeling you can get from doing an exercise. Pain is typically localized at a joint, but not always. Sharp and increases the more you do a movement. This is bad and we don't want this. However, if you're not feeling pain, you could be feeling a stretch, even when you're not stretching. This happens when the muscle belly is lengthened to the point where a neurological response is to contract the muscle and keep it from lengthening further. What you're feeling is both passive tension on the muscle due to the stretch and active tension by your muscle to bring it back in. This is sometimes called the stretch shorten response. Feeling this tension can easily be mistaken for feeling it in the wrong area, even with proper movement. You may be feeling this if your muscles are tight, you didn't warm up, it's cold out, or you're just sore in a particular area. But let's say you are feeling that burning sensation that is associated with overloading a muscle. You get the burning feeling not because a muscle group is dominant, but because it's the weakest link in the chain. When a muscle contracts, it produces force, and there is a maximum amount of force it can contract with. However, when the entire muscle belly contracts, it doesn't always contract with max force. It typically only contracts with enough force to overcome the resistance that's being placed on it. So here, the max theoretical force a muscle could contract with is 100 pounds, and the minimum is 0. If there's 50 pounds of resistance on the dumbbell, the muscle will contract just over 50 pounds of force to get that resistance to move. 50 pounds of force, or 50% capacity, because it's 50% of the theoretical 100-pound max. From day to day, your muscle max capacity changes based on what you eat, how you slept, what you did the day prior, etc. For example, if you did a lot of bicep curls one day, the next day their max capacity will be much less than what it would have been if you didn't do those bicep curls. Notice when the max capacity changes, the level of relative effort for the same 50-pound dumbbell changes too. The closer you are to working towards max capacity, the more likely you are to feel it. This means the place where you feel it is the place that you're working the hardest, not the place that's carrying you through the lift. Take a lunge for instance. A lunge can work both your quads and your glutes. If you feel it in your glutes, that means your glutes are struggling, not making up for lack of quad involvement. Person A can feel it in their quads and person B can feel it in their glutes, and doesn't mean either of them are doing it incorrectly. It means they may have different anthropometry or strength, which contribute to one muscle group needing to work closer to max capacity than the other one. It's important to understand that a muscle being worked isn't the most dominant muscle carrying you through the lift, but it's the weakest link in the chain needing to exert the most effort. Putting everything together, identifying where you're feeling something isn't necessarily an indicator of whether or not you're doing it correctly. Instead, it's information to be utilized to assess your current state. For example, if you're doing a prone incline reverse fly, and you begin to feel it in your lower back, because the bench supports your torso and active muscles are localized to the shoulder and the shoulder girdle, feeling it in the low back may actually be a reason to adjust your posture and could truly be an indication of poor technique. You also want to be extra mindful of the low back as it is an area where the most debilitating pain occurs. However, let's say you're performing a squat. There's a fair amount of hesitancy from beginners in performing their squat effectively since it tends to be ripped apart by trainers pretty frequently. A squat works your quads, your back, your glutes, hamstrings, and calves. So let's say you feel it in your back. This doesn't necessarily mean your form is trash and you're doing it incorrectly. It can mean your back is tight or stiff. If this is the case, look into how you're warming up. Your back could potentially be the weakest link in your posterior chain, In that case, program accordingly to strengthen your lower back. Your back could have taken a beating a few days ago from exercise or sleeping improperly. Take a look at your program frequency or your out-of-gym habits. Maybe your buddy feels it in his glutes and you still feel it in your back. Don't be afraid to be different. You might have different anthropometries, and you guys might just be built different. Just because somebody feels it differently than you doesn't mean either of you guys are doing it wrong. A good trainer should recognize the differences between what is required for safety and efficiency and what can be subject to variability, either interpersonal or intrapersonal. So what do you think of this stance? Let me know in the comments. Also, please consider subscribing for more long, drawn-out answers to seemingly really simple fitness questions. Thank you and good luck.
Go team!
You okay?
Yeah.